All right. Thanks for the introduction, Navi. Today I'll be talking about Redux, and it's the start of my new series, actually. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen right here. Let's see. Cool. Can I just get a thumbs up from one of you if you see my screen? All right, good to go. Good to go. All right, then. Cool. So welcome to the first part of my brand new series, Unpacking React Libraries. I just wrapped up one that was about React concepts. This was purely about React. And then from everyone's suggestions, a lot of questions were coming up about different libraries, like should I use Redux, should I use Next.js, Gatsby, and all that. So I thought I'd just dive into each one of them. So the first one is Redux. A little bit about me. I've been programming since 2015. I'm a senior developer at Mastery Coding, part-time instructor at New Camp, and it's my 8th time here, I think. It's been a couple times I've been here, but you can add me in LinkedIn at Justin-Punz. I talk to everybody. I reply to everybody. So just add me there and I'll be happy to see you. Ask me any of your questions too. So and here's a quick disclaimer really quickly. This presentation will not go into the implementation of Redux. Like this is not going to be like a code along. Okay, this is just going to talk about why and if you should use it. Because I think before you invest a lot of time into learning any big framework or library, you should really know the motive behind it. Also, if you know why you want to learn it, I think it would make it less boring and more exciting to learn as well. So what are we going to be talking about? I always love to start with an overview so you know where I'm at in these presentations. So we're going to talk about just the history of Redux, the context API, and whether or not you need Redux. I'll have like a set of questions and additional resources for each of these. Anything I cite here, I'll share the presentation later. Anything I cite here will have a source below it. So if you see a number there that kind of surprises you, just go in the presentation notes and you can pick out the source I took it from. Okay, so let's get started. History of Redux. Let's go over a quick summary. Okay, so before I get started with that though, I just want to feel the room. Does anyone know why Redux was made? And I'll be sure to have the chat open. Don't worry about being wrong or right. There's multiple answers to this. Any wild guesses? No idea. To deal with state management. Yeah, it's a big one. Okay, Karn's got one. Samantha, to manage state easier. Yeah. Passed around the state to any component. Yeah, data loss. These are all really good answers. Yeah, global state is really what I was looking for here. But yeah, these are great. The next question I would ask after saying that is like, can you manage state without Redux? Can you deal with global state without Redux? And I'll dive into that more. So thank you for all your answers. Right there. So I want to talk about why it's special. It has a single source of truth. The state is read-only and changes are made with pure functions. All the stuff I took here is directly from the Redux documentation. So I didn't pull this out of my own head. I just thought I'd want to take it directly from the writers themselves. So single source of truth. The global state of your application is stored in an object tree with a single store. So that just means that every part of your app, I'll have an image for this too, will be just touching one central state, or at least they'll have the ability to tap into that. So you don't have to keep passing your state up and down like multiple levels of components. State is also read-only. So the only way to change the state is to emit an action. So if I wanted to change the state, I'd have to use the dispatch. I can't just, it's kind of like how state is immutable in our normal like hooks or even in the old component lifecycle. It's like you have to use set state or some other function to change it. You can't change it directly. And changes are made with the pure functions, like I said. So it's we get to decide explicitly how to change the data. So that's if you're working with like a colleague or some contractor, you want them to interface with your state in a very specific way, a very specific function, so that they're not just directly changing it. These rules are set in place so that your app is more scalable. However, oh no, this is bad. I'm sorry, everybody. Let me just move these out of the way. That's a little hiccup there. Those are supposed to be transitions. So I just butchered that. I was supposed to have images there. But anyways, um, so the motivation for creating Redux really is that it attempts to make state mutations predictable. Okay, so both can be great in separation, but together they can create a mess. If you've ever worked on like, started a small project before, and it's like maintainable at first, you have like a counter and all that, then you added several pages. And then now you have like so many components with different naming conventions, different folders and all that. And now you're trying to pass in state across like one super low level component to like the other side. It can get really tricky. So Dan Abramov, who's one of the maintainers of Redux, who's actually one of the creators, compared to this, it's like Coke and Mentos. They're very good separately, but when you combine them, it can be very messy. So this is kind of trying to keep them separate and organized. And here's the timeline of Redux really quickly. So you might notice here, look, if you notice here, June to October is like, they went from version 0.2 to version 4. That's crazy, right? So Redux was born by Dan Abramov and Andrew Clark. They created it in 2015. Um, Dan Abramov was actually already on the React team at the time, so this is something he made as like a solution to some of their problems there. But they went from version 0.2 to version 1 in just a week, and then from there they went from version 1 to version 4 in just the span of a couple months. That's crazy. If you think about it, like React changes like every year, and if it doesn't, like they'll hype it up for a very long time. So yeah, but in version 4, this is the very first complete version of React Redux. This is when more people started adopting it. This is where they added that store, where you see store equals store. That's where it came from. That's the major change there. In 2016, they added version 5 came out, and they added this thing called top-down updates. It allowed the parents to subscribe to store before the children. So it's a lot of jargon here, but just know that it makes things faster. And when things change in your tree, it knows not to update the entire tree. It only knows now to update certain nodes, which makes your app faster. And it's very cool because you don't have to manage that. It just does that behind the scenes for you. And then version 6 in 2018, they updated their logic of that subscription stuff to use the create context provided by React. So it's much faster, even faster than it was before. So before, think about this, they were making their own global state management thing. And then later on, they decided just to use React's built-in context API. And then lastly, we have Redux version 7, which is very cool. This one focused more on just making it compatible with hooks and making it compatible with other frameworks and libraries like Firebase or Redux forms. So this one was really just made as a way to interface with these new things because React has changed so much. Now, of course, I didn't put this there to overwhelm you. Is the history important? It's a big question to ask. Not really, but it's always good to know the reasoning over memorizing rules and syntax. So if any of the stuff is kind of like so much right now, and you want to look at it later, I put the link to where I got that from. It's by the actual creators of Redux, but don't let it overwhelm you. I just thought it'd be a cool thing to share about how it's evolved over the years. So what's context? I see this question a lot. A lot of people ask, should I use context? Should I use Redux? Should I use both? And all that. So I hope this will clear up the fog here. Let's talk about prop drilling first. So this is kind of just a concept that lives outside of React. It kind of lives in any kind of MVC or any kind of framework for front end stuff. So if you notice here, we have a state here, and we have a to-do app, and we have a state there, and we have to pass it all the way down to the toggle to do, which is this checkbox. When I tick it, it goes ahead and passes the state all the way back up again. So this is what you call prop drilling. You see how it had to pass through from to-dos to toggle to do. It had to pass through 1, 2, 3. It had to move down 3 layers just to touch the component it wanted to get to. And again, move up 1, 2, 3 layers to get back to where it needed to be. So when you pass data from one component to another by going through other parts that do not need the data, that is prop drilling. So the other parts of it don't need it, but it only helps with passing it around. So you can imagine this can get really messy. And Some would say it's even an anti-pattern. So be very careful when you start doing this kind of stuff. So let's talk about the performance behind prop drilling. It's very important. So this is a lot, but if you see here, if I have the title username for this app and I want to pass it down to the profile, if you look at these nodes right here, I'm passing it through 1, 2, 3, 4 things before it gets to like the profile. But the sad thing is that whenever the props change in general, it'll re-render. And it can also mutate the state in between these things. So the intermediary components will also be forced to re-render. And on top of that, if I just did username with a capital N here, which I do sometimes, or someone else did, and someone did a lowercase one, it's going to break my app. Like it's only human, and it makes sense that we might slip up, and a typo could screw up our entire project. As you can see right here, the username prop now is a capital W, capital U. But anyways, if you have a typo, that's also another reason why you want to avoid prop drilling. This also makes refactoring very tricky. As you can see, it passes through like 4 components and all that. And because it's causing a re-render on a small app, it won't be that bad. But if you scale this up to a dynamic newsfeed like Facebook, it can get very performant heavy because you're updating so many different components at the same time that don't need to be updated. So just keep that in mind when you're making it. If you're making a small app, don't worry about it too much, but as it scales, it's a good thing to keep in mind. So now let's jump into context, like the big name in the room. Why is it so cool? Well, if I create a provider, I can access, it's pretty much a way of passing the data around without having to drill down the props. So this thing came out in version 16 of React, and it's a way to pass data through a component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. It's directly from the documentation right there. It's considered global for a tree of React components, and it's not a dedicated state management tool like Redux. So all this means is that I can pass down data, but I have to tell it how to change that data. So for example, if profile and top nav want to use username, if I have a provider here, I don't have to say username pass it into page and then pass username from page into profile. As long as I add this umbrella provider, I can access it anywhere here. So moving from there, I have a supporting image because I think visuals are much better explainers here. But we have prop drilling versus context. Okay, get my little pointer out. So if you see here, we're sharing the same amount of data, except on the left-hand side is prop drilling. On the right-hand side is the context API. Prop drilling, I have to explicitly pass down this prop from container component to child component to child component. This arrow means that I'm passing the same prop there. However, on the right-hand side, we have the context API. I just say that, hey, I have this piece of data, and I'm going to let every single component underneath this umbrella touch it. So I don't need to say, hey, container component, pass your data to child component. Excuse me. So does anyone have any questions at this point? I know this is kind of like a really confusing part of it. I just want to make sure that we're good. Okay, cool. I think this picture pretty much sums up what I was trying to explain there. So just know that the context API pretty much just makes it so that you can avoid prop drilling. So implementation of context right here. So here's some code. So I'm hoping that you're familiar with the use state right here. So it's the way how we can maintain state, change state, and all that stuff. But there's a new person here now. It's create context. So like I said, it's how we allow other parts of our app to take the data without using prop drilling. So the first thing we do is we create context with create context, conveniently named. And then after that, we also use a provider to provide data with the value prop. Okay, so as you can see here, I create it right here, call it counter context. This is a counting app. And then I do context.provider. And if I want the children to take on that value, I just say value equals, and I pass in count, increment, and decrement. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's how you do it. And if you can see here on the increment counter right here, if I import that, I can just take in the context. I can consume the data with a consumer. And I can use context right here, counter context, to taking that data right there. So I can just say increment, increment, and it would be there. So moving on from there, there are some pitfalls to this, though. It's important to also know about these. So intermediary components will also be forced to re-render. Okay, so like I said before in the prop drilling, because it's passing through so many things, if the props change, then it's going to force the component to change, right? Because that's how components work. Whenever a state or prop changes, it's going to force a re-render. So large context, the pitfall of context is that it actually does the same thing. If you change the state in the context, it'll still change it. It'll still change it. It'll still force your other components to re-render. And to answer some questions in the chat, you can get more documentation about the context API from the React documentation, actually, too. So you want to keep your state close to the component as they can. Like you want to break it up as much as you can. And for some of you more advanced people, even a memoization won't prevent a re-render because it's just the way that React works. Let me try to find a picture here that'll help out with that for one of your questions. So as you can see here, I have a user provider. Instead of putting this at the very top of my app, I only put it to the part that needs it. Because if I put it all the way up here above app, it'll cause all these components below to re-render as well. So you generally want to split it up as much as you can if you're going to be using the context API. Okay, so does context take away Redux? Because I mean, some of you might be thinking, I don't think I need it anymore because I mean this pretty much takes care of my global state, or it actually might even be easier, right? So, but here's my general rule: if the state is frequently updated, Redux is better. You want to use context for global state management, but it needs careful planning. You really want to think about it before you jump into it, instead of doing it on the fly, because it can get very messy, and because you don't have the prop drilling to help you out with knowing where the components will go or the props will go, it's helpful to draw it out. But for really complex global state management context, Redux is better for really complex global state management, and context is just better to avoid prop drilling in general. So you can use them together. I like to think that they can be friends. You don't have to pick one or the other here. Using them together can be pretty powerful because you don't always need something to be tossed into your global state. Sometimes you just need help passing data around so that you don't have to prop drill. So yeah, I would suggest try using context before jumping into Redux right away. Redux has some better optimizations though to prevent re-rendering if you have it amongst like the giant app. That's why it has one global state. It has its own optimizations there, but of course the downfall is that, or the pitfall is that there's a lot more coding you have to do. But I'll be talking about this in the next couple parts. So it's a lot, but you'll still be able to use React without this information, without just for the context bit. You can still use React without knowing context. It's just a nice little tidbit. So, but now is the big question of the presentation. What do you need Redux? And I think this is really important for all of us whenever we, again, learn any framework, because a lot of the times we're just told just to learn it. Just learn it, question it later. But if you got the time to dive into it and ask a bunch of questions. So do you need Redux? So first, I'm just going to talk about when you need to use Redux. Okay, so like I said before, it's a global store. It's a global state. So if you see here without Redux on the left-hand side, we'll be just tossing our state all over the place, prop drilling. With Redux, the entire app just has access to this one central store. On the right-hand side, I have this like shopping app. Here's a perfect example of when you'd want to use Redux, because there's so much state here. Think about it. I'm changing quantity here. I'm going into this one page to add something to my cart. I have a cart to deal with now. You know, if I delete something from the cart, if I go on any page, I want to be able to know that I removed it from the cart. This is just really complex state, and Redux will just really help you with that. Doing this with context would really be a headache, in my opinion, prop drilling is a nightmare if you're going to try to do this, which is why people turn to Redux right away. But when using Redux with React, states will no longer need to be lifted up. This makes it easier for you to trace which action causes any change. So when I tick this minus button here in quantity, Redux will automatically know, hey, that state changed. So I'm going to change the order total now, and you can even add some more complex math where it's like tax and stuff like that. Oh, I deleted the Strive shoulder pack. So now I'm going to change the order total as well. It's like, hey, I changed my shipping method now to expedited 1-day shipping for some reason. I'm going to change my total now too. It's all stuff like that, and it'll really help you out with that. And then here's another thing. If you love order and a clear process, Redux is for you. It's done so it's specifically written in a way that forces you to go through a bunch of steps, but because of that, it's really neat. This is pretty much the whole flow of it. You have the state. It's a never-ending cycle. You have the state, which defines the UI. There's something in your UI like a button or an input that will trigger an action. And then that's sent into a reducer, which tells the store to update, and which tells the state to redefine, which tells the state to change again. And it starts the whole thing all over again. So here I have examples for each of those in the code implementations. But there is like a big pitfall to this as well, where it's like, even the writer himself, Dan Evernov, the creator of Redux, is like, you might not need Redux. Yeah, it's like his main thing that he gets a lot is, why do I have to touch 3 files to get a simple feature working? It's like, can I scale my app without it? So it's a nice article that he wrote back then. It still holds up today. I put it here in the notes as well. But he has like his own sets of questions that he likes to have people ask themselves. It's like, if your app is working without Redux now, you probably don't need it. That's just how it is. It's like, there's no need to make your app more complicated. You can still do Redux concepts without using Redux, like what I showed you with the context API. And my production app at work in Mastery Coding, we have a learning management system that manages teachers and students and their progress on their course, and we don't use Redux either. But there's that. I think it's a very interesting read. But I want you to think about this too. So, do you feel pressured to do things the Redux way? And if so, do you have good reasons for doing so? You don't have to answer in the chat. It's just something I'd like to ask people. Because if you don't know, it's really just an indicator that you should research more on why you should use it. But congrats, we made it. I hope it's inspired you to dive deeper into each of your stacks. And I have some potential future topics, like reach out to me so I know what to make next. I'm thinking Next.js or Gatsby is another common question I get. Maybe there's an aspect of Redux you want me to dive into more that I didn't cover. Apollo is very popular now. If you're into GraphQL world, I use Apollo at work. And I actually prefer it over any other global state management thing. NPM, it's this thing that we just kind of use, or some of us use Yarn. I can dissect it for you and present that as well. But at the end of the day, I just want to be presenting things that provide value to all of you. So with that, thank you very much. Any questions?
I have a question for you.
Yeah, let me pull up the pictures, or the gallery, so I know who I'm talking to.
My name's Edward.
All right. What's your question?
My question is, where do you recommend somebody do you have a link or a resource that would be an easy to follow guide on how to get started with React?
With React? Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, it's yeah. It depends on what kind of learner you are. Are you a course person, or are you like an article type of reader?
Follow the instructions, like on YouTube.
You like to read?
Illustration.
Oh, on YouTube. I'm not really too familiar with the YouTube stuff.
I'm reading, so I'll take whatever you got.
Okay. I can post it there. My own sources of stuff I'd like to look. I mean, I honestly haven't looked at a tutorial for learning how to use React for a while, so I would actually have to do some digging before I get back to you on that. But I think that's a perfect question to ask the Mintbean channels.
Yeah, definitely. I think Edward, drop that question in some of the channels in Minbean, and I think someone might be able to direct you on. It's really hard to say like to recommend a specific tutorial because everyone learns so differently. But yeah, definitely drop it in one of the channels, and I'm sure someone will be able to give you at least a couple of materials on like, hey, like check out this, and I'll see if I can get some information on it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so someone, Amy said in the chat, Westboss has some React tutorial. I think Westboss's tutorials are pretty much the best ones out there if you're willing to pay for it. I haven't heard anyone tell me that it's not good. I used it myself before. If you want to use Udemy, there's also Stephen Grider. He's a great one as well, if you're willing to pay a bit. But I think those are much better than the YouTube ones.
I
Yeah.
think
Thanks for dropping the links out there.
yeah, Amy just dropped the West Boss can get expensive, but yeah, he's got rave reviews, I think, all around. So
Oh, I have a tip for Westboss too. If you email him and just ask him for a coupon, he'll give you a huge discount. That's what I did.
do you have his email?
He put it on his website,
Okay.
so I don't
Well,
have it on hand. Yeah.
all right. Well, there you go, guys.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions on the Redux stuff before we sign off?
I had a question actually about context.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've worked with Redux moderately, but this is the 1st time I've really heard about the context. Do you think that it works well when building full stack, or would you still recommend using Redux in those cases?
Are you working on the project alone, or are you by yourself?
Yeah. I mean, right now I
Okay,
am, but just like in general, do you think that like if you were working on something rather small scale, but did require that kind of back end connection, would context still kind of do some of the things that Redux would?
Yeah, I mean, it would take a little bit more steps, I would say. But if you're working on by yourself, you should just use the stack that's most comfortable to you. The biggest reason why I'd want to use Redux for your project, because it sounds like you might want to have other people jump on, because Redux forces you to abide by certain standards. It might be better to use it just now if you plan on scaling it and adding other people to your project, because there's less teaching you have to do about your code base, because you can just show them all of the dispatchers, all the actions, and the entire store, and they'll be able to jump in faster that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think someone else asked a question about getting employed. Yeah, there's. So Samantha asked too. I thought that you would have more opportunities of jobs if you knew Redux, from what I heard. So I would say it's not something we particularly look for. I mean, if you have experience in one big state management tool already, like Apollo or anything like of that sort, like it's okay. It's just that it's really more about that you know how to deal with global state management. So it's not like a big thing we want to see. Of course, it wouldn't hurt to have it, but I wouldn't feel like you have to put it on there to get hired. You just need to show that you know how to deal with global state.
Great point, Justin.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. All right, guys, if you don't have any more questions, Justin, do you think we could get, if you could share these slides in the current event channel?
Absolutely. I'll do that right now.
Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining yet another Mintbean workshop. We're so excited to bring a few more. I think somebody from our dev team actually just talked about coming and doing a Postman workshop. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for
Bye.
stopping by.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.